after weekly party lunches for more work on federal aviation programs. In about 10 minutes or so, the Chamber expected to vote on the Wicker Amendment dealing with collective bargaining at the Transportation Security Administration. Right now, John McCain is speaking of Arizona.
That it would approach the end of Western civilization as we know it if we eliminated this obviously outdated and unnecessary $200 million of the taxpayers' money. I am reminded, to paraphrase a comment made once by President Ronald Reagan, who said, "The closest thing to eternal life here on earth is a government program." There is nothing that illustrates that point more than the Essential Air Service program. I would like to ask unanimous consent that three letters be included in the record. One is from Freedom Works, the other is from the National Taxpayers Union, and the other is from the Citizens Against Government Waste. I would ask that they be included in the record.
Without objections, ordered.
Freedom Works says the ESA is a prime example of wasteful spending. A graph produced by the FAA shows that 99.95% of all Americans live within 120 miles of a major public airport. The taxpayers should not be forced to subsidize rural airports with too little demand. I urge you to repeal the EAS to save taxpayers $1 billion over the next 5 years. And National Taxpayers Union cites the cities of Macon and Athens, Georgia, both less than 90-minute drive from Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson International Airport. Despite this, the U.S. Department of Transportation subsidized 26 flights per week to and from each city at a clip of $464 per passenger for Macon, $135 for Athens. And then, of course, the government's Citizens Against Government Waste points out that Congress cannot continue on a spending rampage while ignoring the nation's balance sheets. Mr. President, probably the loudest complaints have been from the state of Alaska, a state I love and enjoy. There's a great article that appeared in the Alaska newspaper, and it's called "Self-Sustainability, Is It Time for Alaska to Grow Up?" Among other things that I didn't know about was while the nation faces a $14 trillion fiscal hole and Congress is looking to tighten its belt, it's inevitable that Alaska is going to feel some of the pain. But the interesting thing is that the state of Alaska, he goes on to state, has $12 billion in reserves and another $40 billion banked away in the permanent fund. Wow. I don't know of another state in the Union that is that well off. He goes on to say, it's written by Andrew Halcrow, "We Alaskans fancy ourselves as rugged individualists who are quick to eschew the long arm of the federal government and Big Brother. However, our actions sometimes don't match our rhetoric." And what about the amendment? He goes on to eliminate Essential Air Service subsidies in small rural communities throughout Alaska. Currently, the feds subsidize air service to more than 44 communities to the tune of $12 million per year. And the author goes on to say, is it really the federal government's role to subsidize air service to Rampart, a community with 15 people? Interesting question. He goes on to say, we've known this day was coming but have done little to prepare our communities for it. We have continued to live in a subsidized world where one of the biggest issues so far this legislative session has been a debate over suspending Alaska's measly gas tax. This week, Alaska Senator Mark Begich, in response to the announced ban on earmarks, stated, quote, "I've said many times, Alaska is a young state with many needs, and we deserve our fair share of federal funding to develop our resources and our infrastructure." The author goes on to say, while I would absolutely agree that federal policies have restricted Alaska's ability to develop its vast resources, The young state argument has been used for decades to justify growing demands on the federal budget for things like the Denali Commission and earmarks for controversial bridges. This year, Alaska turns 52, so arguably we're not kids anymore. Is it time for us to grow up? Is it time for all of us to grow up and eliminate these federal programs that cost billions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, which originally may have, and I emphasize may have, in 1978 when we deregulated the airlines, have a legitimate reason. Obviously, it doesn't anymore. So I look forward to the fact that our conservative organizations are all judging these as a key vote. And I would also point out to my colleagues, if we're serious about cutting spending and going about making tough decisions, this is an easy decision. And if we vote against my amendment, the majority votes against my amendment to eliminate essential air service, the message to the American people as of November 2nd is we aren't serious. We aren't serious. Because if we can't eliminate a program like this, how can we make the really tough decisions that are coming? The yeas and nays have been ordered. I hope that we will have a vote as soon as reasonably possible, and look forward to the continued debate on this issue, which seems to have created quite a large degree of controversy throughout the country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, there will be 20 minutes of debate equally divided prior to a vote in relation to Amendment Number 14, offered by the Senator from Mississippi as amended. Senator from Mississippi.
I yield under the previous order 4 minutes to the Senator from Maine, Senator Collins.
Senator from Maine is recognized.
Mr. President, I thank the Senator from Mississippi. Mr. President, I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of Senator Wicker's amendment to provide additional workforce protections for transportation security officers, while at the same time ensuring the management flexibility that is vital to the operational efficiency of the TSA and thus the security of the American people. Mr. President, instead of dramatically changing the TSA personnel system in a way that could interfere with TSA's ability to carry out its essential mission as the administration plans, we should instead make some targeted but important reforms in the system to ensure that TSA employees are treated fairly. First, we should bring TSA employees under the Whistleblower Protection Act, which safeguards the rights of whistleblowers throughout the federal government. Second, we should give TSA workers the right to an independent appeal of adverse personnel actions. For example, a demotion would qualify. What we're proposing is that a TSA employee so affected would be able to appeal to the Merit Systems Protection Board. Third, we should make clear that TSA members can, in fact, join a union. That is a different issue from collective bargaining. So our amendment specifically provides that we are not depriving employees of that choice, which they have right now. Mr. President, I've just received a letter from a former TSA administrator, Kip Hawley, who was extremely well regarded and served as the head of TSA for 4 years. He expresses support for the amendment that Senator Wicker and I are offering. Mr. Hawley knows firsthand how important it is for TSA to have the flexibility in order to respond quickly and effectively to changing conditions, to emerging threats, to new intelligence, and to impending crises. And I would note, Mr. President, this is not theoretical. TSA has used this authority in the past. In 2006, for example, TSA had to respond virtually overnight to the liquids plot to blow up airplanes that originated in Great Britain. Overnight, TSA had to retrain its workers, redeploy them to different airports. This is not a theoretical concern. Another example was the blizzard that occurred in Denver, where TSA officials had to be, screeners had to be flown in from another city to cover the shifts of TSA employees at that airport. This kind of management flexibility was also used in the wake of the Gulf Coast hurricanes when there were massive evacuations. In his letter, Mr. Hawley states that although TSA's recent determination states that security policies and procedures will not be issues subject to collective bargaining, the dividing line between security and non-security practices is not a bright one. He makes the same point that former Homeland Security Secretary Chertoff made the last time we debated this issue, and that is defining what is and what isn't subject to collective bargaining undoubtedly will be subject to subsequent litigation. He further notes that the resolution of these issues could rest with an arbitrator with no direct knowledge of security issues, intelligence, and transportation security. And that could place the performance of TSA's security mission in the hands of someone with neither the expertise to make these decisions nor a person who is accountable for them. And I would ask that the entire letter be part of the record. I would ask unanimous consent.
Without objection, the senator has used her time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge our colleagues to support this amendment. I think it's a balanced approach that will give these employees more rights than they currently have without interfering with the essential mission of this law enforcement agency. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Do I understand that I have 6 minutes remaining?
Senator has 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Okay, I was under the impression that I had yielded 4 minutes to the senator from Maine.
Would the majority object to the senator from Mississippi taking 6 minutes? Without objection, the senator has 6 minutes.
I will reserve the balance of my time. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I just yield myself 5 minutes right now. Mr. President, I listened carefully to the statement made by my friend, the senator from Maine, and quite frankly, I wonder if we're in parallel worlds here and we're talking about the same thing but in a different context. My friend, the senator from Maine, seems to be ignoring the very careful limitations that TSA has placed on collective bargaining rights. For example, under the provision of TSA, the transportation security officers cannot bargain over pay. They can't bargain over pay. They cannot bargain over deployment procedures. Who works where? The senator mentioned the incident involving Great Britain. They had to train people overnight. Well, they can't bargain on training either. That's not part of the bargaining rights that they would have. The senator mentioned about the deployment of people to Denver because of a blizzard. Well, deployment procedures, who works where, is not, again, subject to collective bargaining. And emergency response measures, that was the one dealing with Great Britain. On emergency response measures, who goes where, how long they have to be there for an emergency response is not negotiable. It's not part of the collective bargaining agreement. So I'm at a loss to understand what the senator from Maine was talking about. They cannot bargain over emergency response procedures, deployments, or other security issues. So again, this is not something that is part of the collective bargaining agreement. Now, last week, the Transportation Security Administration said that the administrator, John Pistole, testifying before the House subcommittee, said that the employee morale is a security issue. Employee morale. Now, why do you say that? A recent survey ranked TSA 220 out of 224 federal employers as the best place to work. In other words, 224 would be the worst place to work in the federal government. TSO was rated at 220. They have a high turnover rate, they have a high injury rate, and extremely low morale. So what we're trying to do is to give them that boost up in morale. And here's what the TSA administrator said last week. He said, quote, "The safety of the traveling public is our top priority, and we will not negotiate on security. But morale and employee engagement cannot be separated from achieving superior security." End of quote. While some of my colleagues have suggested that providing collective bargaining rights could jeopardize security, nothing could be further from the truth. Unionized security personnel are just as effective, dedicated, and willing to put their lives on the line in an emergency. I point out, for example, Border Patrol personnel have collective bargaining rights. Immigration and customs officials have collective bargaining rights. Our Capitol Police officers who protect us here have collective bargaining rights. Why should TSOs be any different? To suggest that a unionized security personnel are somehow less effective, less dedicated, less willing to put their lives on the line in an emergency, I believe is an insult to every man and woman in uniform in this country who works under a collective bargaining agreement. I only need to remind everyone, remember 9/11. Remember that image of all of the people in New York running away from those towers as they came down, the thousands of people running away from that calamity. And the picture was of other people running into it. Our police, our firefighters, our emergency personnel, who not only risked their lives but gave their lives to help save people in that tragedy. Every single one of them, every firefighter, every policeman, emergency personnel, were all union people, belonged to a union with collective bargaining rights. And yet look what they did during that emergency. So again, I think it's important to add, Mr. President, that under this agreement, they get limited collective bargaining rights. They cannot bargain over security procedures and policies, deployment, disciplinary standards, or, quote, any action deemed necessary by the administrator or his or her designee to carry out the agency mission during emergencies. Can't negotiate on that. So again, Mr. President, we just want to help raise the morale there, to give these people bargaining rights.
Senator has consumed 5 minutes.
I'll take one more minute.
Without objection.
Mr. President, here's what they can bargain on. Grievance procedures. That helps on morale. Non-emergency scheduling helps on morale. Awards and recognitions. Uniforms. Bidding on shifts and procedures used for how they bid on shifts. Who gets the 2 a.m. shift? Who gets the 7 a.m. shift? All non-emergency types of situations. This will help give them a better morale, and I think will help in terms of ensuring security. Don't take my word for it. Take the administrator's word for it, Administrator John Pistole, who said that this will help ensure the safety of the traveling public. I reserve the balance of our time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
I yield myself 5 minutes. And, of course, I rise in support of the Wicker Amendment. Senator Collins, who spoke earlier, is a co-sponsor of this amendment. I might also note that Senator Coburn has joined as a co-sponsor also. The Wicker Amendment has everything to do with public safety. It has everything to do with preventing excessive litigation when it comes to the definitions of the roles of our TSA workers. It has everything to do with preventing increased deficits here in the United States and in the federal government. And for that reason, groups that support the Wicker Amendment today and urge an aye vote include the Heritage Foundation, the Workforce Fairness Institute, and Americans for Tax Reform. Now, just a little history for those who haven't followed this debate over the last several days. Currently, TSA employees are not allowed to collectively bargain. That has been the policy of the federal government since the inception of the Transportation Security Administration. For a decade, TSA employees have not been allowed to collectively bargain. Their rights and considerations and morale issues have been taken care of in other ways. Since the creation of TSA, its employees have been treated like those in the FBI, the CIA, and the Secret Service for purposes of collective bargaining. In fact, in a 2003 memo, the Undersecretary of Transportation for Security, which is now the TSA administrator, prohibited TSA security screeners from unionizing with collective bargaining rights, and the Undersecretary at the time made this decision, quote, in light of their critical national security responsibilities. And that has been the regime under which we have operated the TSA for the entire existence of the agency. Now, however, the Obama administration is, I think, intent on doling out rewards to campaign supporters, and they are moving to reverse this decade-long decision and to allow TSA workers to collectively bargain. My amendment would prevent that, and as I say, would keep the TSA employees under the same restrictions as FBI, CIA, and Secret Service. Now, Senator Collins and her modification to my amendment provided some very important safeguards. It allows TSA workers to be under the Merit Systems Protection Board. It also provides Whistleblower Protection Act protections for TSA employees. Now, we're told that our concerns about safety have been taken care of because the agreement or the decision by the TSA administrator says we can't have collective bargaining over other security issues. It names several, then says other security issues. What does that mean? That's what the former administrator was talking about in the letter to Senator Collins. This is going to require litigation to determine what, quote, other security issues are. I'll tell you what apparently is allowed under the administrator's proposal. It does allow bargaining over the selection process for special assignments. It allows collective bargaining over the policies for transfer. It allows collective bargaining for shift training, as my friend from Iowa just acknowledged. All of these are going to make the TSA less flexible and less efficient in going about their business of protecting Americans. I would close by saying this. This is a budget debate also. At the other end of this building, we're having hour after hour of debate about how to keep this deficit from ballooning, how to keep the cost of government from going up. Does anybody think that allowing collective bargaining for 50,000 additional federal employees is going to cut the cost of the federal government?
The senator has consumed 5 minutes.
I'll yield myself the final minute.
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. What is happening out in the states? Mr. President. State after state after state is facing bankruptcy, and a large part of it is the cost of government brought on by employee union contracts. And that's just a fact. And state after state, governor after governor, they're coming to Washington, D.C. and saying, we're going to have to do something about this. We're going to have to break these contracts and save us from financial ruin. Now, at a time when governors are moving in that direction and trying to get out from under these public employee collective bargaining agreements, wouldn't it be the height of irresponsibility? Wouldn't it be the height of irony?
Senator's time has expired.
Federal government to go in the other direction. Vote for the Wicker Amendment and save the taxpayer the additional money that it will take to move to collective bargaining.
Senator from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. President, how much time remains on our side?
4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Let me just say that the TSA administrator has the right to allow collective bargaining for TSA employees through the authority that is provided in the original Aviation and Transportation Security Act passed in 2001. When Congress passed that, we came to an agreement that left the determination of allowing collective bargaining rights for transportation security officers to the TSA administrator. I firmly believe that this authority should remain with the TSA administrator. The current agreement was approved under the Bush administration and approved by a Republican-controlled House of Representatives. I saw no reason to alter this compromise at this time. There are valid reasons to keep the authority with the TSA administrator. He works firsthand with the employees every day. The nature of his work is very hands-on, and he's better qualified to determine the agency's mission, how it can be improved with or without collective bargaining. He really more than anybody. On Friday, Administrator Pistole announced his intention to allow collective bargaining over workforce issues, but security and pay will not be subject to negotiation. Most other federal law enforcement agencies, including others housed within the Department of Homeland Security, such as Customs and Border Patrol, have collective bargaining rights. I don't believe the sponsors of this amendment would question the dedication of these law enforcement officers despite their right to collectively bargain. TSA employees must still follow civil service rules that prohibit the right to strike and allow managers to move forward workers to different areas and roles in the event of an emergency and security is needed. I cannot support this amendment. I feel it could negatively impact security if TSA permits collective bargaining rights to improve employee retention. Finally, this amendment is a security issue and one that is better addressed when a TSA reauthorization comes to the floor. This is our problem. We're not talking about security here. We're talking about other matters. Accordingly, I urge my fellow senators to oppose the Wicker Amendment. I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
How much time do we have left on this?
1 minute and 39 seconds.
You yield me that time? Mr. President, listen, my friend from Mississippi talked about deficits, and we got to be concerned about deficits. The first thing here on what they cannot bargain on is pay. That is not something they can bargain on. No federal employee bargains on pay, I might add. So I don't know what that means. I mean, he's talking about deficits, but they can't bargain about pay anyway. And then talked about the FBI and the CIA and the Secret Service, that they don't collectively bargain. Those agencies all deal with very highly sensitive national security information. What are we talking about? We're talking about the people that check your bags. We're talking about the people at the screenings and that do the pat-downs. But we're also talking about an agency that has one of the highest turnovers of any federal agency. I don't want a high turnover rate among those people at the airport. I want them to be highly skilled, highly trained, highly motivated. I want a good morale system there. Everyone says it's one of the lowest morales, one of the highest turnovers of any federal agency. Giving these people the right to organize, to bargain collectively on things that are not of national security measures, not pay, not emergency procedures, but other things that make life a little bit better for them so that they know Basically, what is the procedure for me being posted here? What's the procedure for me working at 2 a.m. or 7 a.m. so that they have a system whereby they know what's expected of them? To me, that is the way to build morale.
Senator's time has expired.
I just asked 30 seconds. I gave him 2 minutes.
Is there objection?
I just gave him
The
2
objection
minutes.
is heard.
I just gave him 2 minutes. I didn't object.
The objection is heard. The time that was given to the other side was due to an error in the chair.
Well, I guess
The question is on the Wicker Amendment, number 14, the yeas as modified.
As for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Yes. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. DeMint. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Carey. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez.
No.
Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker.
You have to be on it to make
Mr. Wyden. Mr. Coates. Mr. Isaacson.
But you couldn't offer your second degree either without
Mr.
being
McConnell.
honest. So it might be a question of timing.
Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Chambliss, Coates, Coburn, Cochran, Collins, Cornyn, Grassley, Hatch, Hutchison, Inhofe, Isaacson, Kyle, McConnell, Rubio, Snow, and Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Akaka, Baucus, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Brown of Ohio, Cardin, Casey, Feinstein, Harkin, Inouye, Lieberman, Manchin, Menendez, Mikulski, Murray, Nelson, Nebraska, Nelson of Florida, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Schumer, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, and Webb. Ms. Stabenow? No. Mr. Merkley? Mr. Merkley? No. Ms. Murkowski? Aye. Mr. Ensign? Mr. Ensign? Aye. Mr. Vitter? Aye. Mr. Sessions? Mr. Sessions? Aye. Mr. Bennett? No. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin? Aye. Mr. Wyden? Mr. Wyden? No. Mr. Toomey? Aye. Mrs. Hagan, no. Mr. Carper? Mr. Carper, no. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Johans? Mr. Johans, aye. Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Enzi? Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Risch? Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Tester, no.
Oh.
Ms. Ayotte, aye.
Except that that's what the order says.
Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Beckidge, no. Mr. Franken, no. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Conrad, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, no. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons, no.
I look better today.
Mr. Durbin? Mr. Durbin, no.
Sorry.
Mr. Lautenberg?
It looks better. It looks better.
Mr. Lautenberg, no. Mr. Dement? Aye. Mrs. Boxer? No. Mr. Hoban? Aye. Mr. Kirk? Aye. Ms. Cantwell? No. Mr. Leahy? No. Mr. Portman?
And I will.
Mr. Portman? Aye. Mrs. Gillibrand? No. Ms. Landrieu? No. Mr. Burr? Aye. Mr. Corker? Aye. Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts? Aye. Mr. Thune? Aye. Mr. Cole? No. Mrs. McCaskill? No. Mr. Graham? Aye. Mr. McCain? Mr. McCain? Aye. Mr. Shelby? Aye. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Levin, no.
Are there any senators who wish to vote or change his or her vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 47, the nays are 51. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is withdrawn. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Leader.
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous